Maria lived a quiet life, a life so simple that most people never looked at her twice. She worked at the community music center, not as a musician, not as a performer, but as the woman who cleaned practice rooms and arranged chairs before classes started. She arrived early every morning, always carrying a small bag and wearing the same calm smile. Her footsteps were soft, her voice even softer, and because of that, people around her assumed she was just another ordinary worker, someone who had no big stories, no big dreams, nothing special hiding behind her gentle eyes every day. Students walked past her without noticing her. They talked loudly about their lessons, their exams, their daily stress, and Maria simply stepped aside, letting them pass. The teachers, too, only saw her when they needed something done. "Maria, can you clean this room?" they would say, and she always replied with a polite nod, even when someone spoke to her in a sharp tone. She never reacted. She just continued with her work. Quietly and patiently, some people admired her calm nature, but many took it as a sign of weakness. They believed she had no confidence, no talent, no skill. They believed she was ordinary because she acted ordinary. But Maria carried a secret, a silent truth she never shared with anyone. Many years ago, she had played the piano with passion. She had trained under a skilled teacher. She had performed on stages. And she had dreamed of becoming someone great, but life had different plans. A sudden family problem forced her to leave everything behind. She stopped performing, stopped learning, stopped dreaming, and slowly she hid that part of herself deep inside her heart. She never told anyone because the memory was painful. She believed her music was gone forever, and so she chose a quiet life. A life with no questions, no expectations, and no spotlight one morning. Something unusual happened at the music center. A piano teacher had not arrived, and his class was waiting for their rehearsal to begin. The students stood around complaining loudly, shaking their heads, saying they were wasting time. The teachers looked stressed because that day's practice was important. It was a rehearsal for a difficult classical piece, something that needed a pianist to guide the students. Without a pianist, the whole schedule would fall apart. The head teacher sighed and looked around the room, searching for a solution. That was the moment when someone noticed Maria standing quietly near the door. She had just finished cleaning the hallway and happened to pass by. One teacher, clearly frustrated, pointed at her and said with a half-joking voice, "You, come here. Can you play piano?" Some students laughed softly under their breath. They thought the idea was ridiculous. Maria, the quiet woman who cleaned the rooms, playing a piano meant for advanced students? To them, it was nothing more than a joke, something to laugh about later. Maria froze for a second. She did not expect to be called. She had not touched a piano in years. Her hands suddenly felt cold. But she did not protest. She did not say no. She simply stepped forward slowly. Her heart was beating fast, but her face stayed calm. The students watched her with amused expressions. Some whispered to each other, "This will be funny." Others rolled their eyes. Believing she would refuse or make excuses, no one imagined she would actually try. The teacher handed her a sheet of difficult music, a classical piece that even advanced students struggled with. He did not expect her to play it correctly. He only wanted to save time, or maybe test her reaction. He believed she would panic and step away, but Maria took the paper in her trembling hands and looked at it carefully. The notes on the page felt familiar, like a forgotten language returning to her mind. She felt something warm rising inside her, something she had hidden for years. A quiet ache for music she once loved deeply. She moved toward the piano slowly while everyone's eyes followed her. She sat down gently, adjusting the bench like she had done thousands of times in her childhood. Memories rushed through her mind. Her old teacher's voice, her small performances, the feeling of stage lights, the sound of applause. Those moments felt close again, as if they never left her. She placed her fingers on the keys, her hands shaking slightly. But her heart growing steady underneath. The students stood ready to laugh if she missed a note. The teacher stood ready to sigh in disappointment. But Maria took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. And then she played a single note, a note so clear, so steady, so perfect, that the entire room fell silent in an instant. Every whisper died. Every smirk disappeared. That one note carried a truth no one expected. The woman they thought was ordinary had just touched the piano like someone born with talent. Someone trained, someone gifted. And in that moment, before the music even began fully, the entire room realized they had been wrong about her all along. She was not ordinary, she was extraordinary. And they were about to witness something none of them would ever forget. The room was quiet, almost too quiet. As Maria sat in front of the piano holding the difficult sheet music the teachers had given her, the paper felt heavy in her hands, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. It held years of memories, years of pain, years of dreams she once chased and then abandoned. The teachers had given her the hardest piece on purpose, not out of kindness, not out of trust, but because they expected her to fail. They wanted her to step away, to say she couldn't do it, to prove that she was just ordinary. But Maria didn't step away. Instead, she placed the sheet gently on the stand in front of her. Her fingers brushed the first line of notes, and a small part of her heart opened again. She had not read music in so long that she expected her mind to freeze. But surprisingly, the notes made sense to her. They whispered old memories of her childhood when she would sit for hours practicing, repeating the same bars until her teacher finally smiled with pride. Those days felt distant, but still alive somewhere deep inside her. The students stood behind her, some with crossed arms, others with playful grins, ready to watch her struggle. A few whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "She doesn't even look like someone who knows music," one boy said. "Maybe she'll press random keys," another joked. They had no idea that their words were pushing something stronger inside Maria, something she had buried long ago, a quiet fire, a forgotten strength. One of the younger teachers cleared his throat and said, "Just try your best, Maria." His voice sounded polite, but his eyes showed he didn't expect anything good. Another teacher smirked and said, "This piece is advanced. Don't worry if it's too hard." Maria didn't look at them. She kept her focus on the keys. Her breathing soft and slow, she felt her heart pounding. But she did not let fear take control. She gently rested her fingers on the piano, letting them feel the smooth surface of the keys. It had been years, but her hands still remembered the feeling. The piano was not just an instrument to her. It was a missing part of her life returning home. The teacher standing closest to her sighed impatiently. "Go ahead when you're ready," he said. Maria nodded, though she didn't need permission. She was ready in a way none of them expected. Her fingers pressed the first chord, and the sound filled the room with a surprising clarity. The students who were whispering suddenly stopped. Their eyes widened as the note echoed with a richness that only skilled hands could create. Maria felt a small shiver run through her arms, not of fear, but of recognition. Her fingers moved again, this time with more confidence, playing the next sequence of notes slowly. Carefully but beautifully, the teachers leaned in slightly, confusion growing on their faces. They expected her to stumble on the first bar, but she moved like someone who had played this piece many times before. A few students exchanged looks, one whispering, "Wait. She actually knows what she's doing." Maria kept going, letting the music guide her. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She simply followed the rhythm her heart remembered. And with every note, she reclaimed a piece of her old self. The girl who once breathed music as naturally as air. But the teachers wanted to test her more. The head teacher said, "Maria, try from the middle part. It's the hardest section." His voice sounded gentle, but his intention was clear. He wanted to push her to fail. Maria looked at the sheet music again, her eyes tracing the complicated notes in the middle section. It was a fast-paced part full of sharp transitions and delicate timing. Even advanced students often struggled with it. The students waited eagerly, some expecting her to give up, others expecting a disaster. Maria took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and placed her hands back on the keys. In her mind, she saw her old teacher again, the strict but kind woman who once taught her how to handle the hardest parts of a musical piece. "Trust your hands," the memory whispered. And Maria did exactly that. She started playing the middle section. Not slow, not cautious, but with a flow that shocked everyone. Her fingers moved quickly yet gracefully, dancing across the keys like they had never left the piano world. The sound filled the entire room. Deep, powerful, and full of emotion, students stood frozen. Teachers stared as if they were witnessing something impossible. No one could believe that the same quiet woman who cleaned classrooms could play such difficult music with such natural talent. One teacher dropped the book he was holding, the sound echoing across the room. But even that didn't break Maria's concentration. She kept playing, her hands moving faster and faster, hitting every note with precision. Every sound she created carried years of silence, years of hidden talent, years of longing. The piano responded to her touch like an old friend finally reunited. It didn't matter how long she had stayed away from music. It didn't matter how ordinary she appeared to the world. At this moment, Maria was extraordinary, and everyone saw it clearly. Maria finished the section with a clean, brilliant final chord, and the entire room remained silent. The students who expected failure now looked stunned. The teachers who doubted her now stood speechless. In less than a minute, Maria had changed the entire atmosphere. She had rewritten their opinions with nothing but her fingertips, and she didn't even realize it yet. She only knew one thing: she wasn't done. She was just getting started. Maria kept her hands resting lightly on the piano keys. But the room around her had completely changed. A few minutes ago, everyone was ready to laugh, ready to watch her fail, ready to confirm their belief that she was just a simple woman with no special talent. But now the silence was deep, heavy, and full of shock. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, as if they were seeing her for the first time. Maria took a slow breath, feeling her heartbeat settle. She had just played the hardest section of the piece without a single mistake, but she still didn't feel proud. She only felt something gentle inside her, something warm and familiar. The feeling of returning to a place she once loved. The teachers didn't move at first. They simply stared. Trying to process what they had witnessed, one of the students whispered, "How did she do that?" Another replied softly, "She played like a real pianist." Their voices were full of confusion. Not mockery anymore. Maria looked down at the piano, touched one of the keys softly, and thought of the years she had stayed away from music. She remembered how she used to spend hours practicing, dreaming of performing on a big stage one day. She remembered the joy she felt whenever she played, a joy she thought she had lost forever. The head teacher cleared his throat and stepped a little closer. His voice, normally sharp, sounded calm and curious now. "Maria, could you play the beginning again?" he asked, but it wasn't a command anymore. It was a request, a gentle one. Maria nodded slowly. She lifted her hands and placed her fingers in position. For a moment, she hesitated. The room felt too quiet, too focused on her. Her heart raced. But she pushed her fear aside. Music had always been her safe place, and now it felt like the piano was welcoming her back. She began to play from the start. The first note rang out with the same clarity and beauty as before. This time she played with more emotion, more confidence, letting the music speak for her. The room stayed completely silent. As if the walls themselves were listening, the students stood still, their earlier amusement replaced by admiration. Some even leaned forward, wanting to catch every note. Maria's fingers moved gracefully, each stroke smooth and controlled. She didn't read from the sheet music anymore. She didn't need to. Her hands remembered every melody, every rhythm, every pause. The music was inside her, waiting all these years to be released again. As she played, her mind drifted back to the girl she used to be. She remembered her childhood teacher's encouraging smile, the applause she once heard from small audiences, and the pride she felt when someone said she had talent. But she also remembered the pain of giving it all up, the sadness of leaving her dreams behind because life demanded something else. Those memories blended with the music, making her notes sound deeper, richer, more emotional. Anyone listening could hear that the music meant something personal to her, something far beyond practice or skill. When Maria reached a soft part of the piece, her eyes began to shine, not with fear, but with emotion. It felt like she was telling her life story through the piano, without using a single word. Each note carried a piece of her past, a piece of her heart. and the room felt filled with her emotions. Warm and heavy like summer rain, one of the teachers, a strict older woman who rarely praised anyone, found herself blinking back tears. She whispered, "This is beautiful," and even she was surprised to hear her own voice tremble. The students watched with open mouths, amazed at the transformation happening in front of them. They had always seen Maria as someone ordinary, someone who moved quietly from room to room with a mop or a broom. But now, she sat at the piano with an elegance and grace they had never imagined. She looked like she belonged there, like she was born for that moment. Some students even felt embarrassed for judging her before. They had mocked her without knowing anything about her life, her talent, or her dreams. Maria reached the middle section again. The part she had already played flawlessly earlier. This time, she played it even better. Her fingers moving faster, lighter, and more confidently than before. The room filled with powerful, breathtaking sound. Her expression changed as she played. Her posture straightened, her shoulders relaxed. And for the first time in many years, she looked like a real pianist again. The teachers exchanged glances, each silently admitting that they had severely underestimated her. The music center had held a hidden treasure all this time, and none of them had seen it. A young girl from the class stepped forward slightly, unable to resist asking, "Miss Maria, how did you learn to play like that?" Her voice shook with awe. Maria didn't stop playing, but she smiled gently at the question. She didn't answer yet, because the music itself was her answer. Every note she played told the truth about her past, her love for music, her lost dream, and her hidden talent. She continued to play until the piece reached its final, soft chord. Her fingers rested on the keys for a moment as the sound faded slowly into silence. When she lifted her hands, the room stayed frozen, almost breathless. Nobody moved, nobody blinked. They were too shocked, too overwhelmed by the performance they had just heard. Finally, someone started clapping. Softly at first, then louder, then the entire room joined, filling the space with applause. The sound washed over Maria, warm and comforting. She lowered her head slightly. Overwhelmed but grateful, she didn't expect applause. She didn't expect anything. She simply wanted to play again, even if only for a moment. But now she realized something important. Her dream wasn't dead. It was waiting for her to return to it. And everyone in that room had witnessed the beginning of her comeback. Maria sat quietly on the piano bench after finishing the piece. Her hands were still warm from the keys, and her heartbeat was slowly returning to normal. The applause had stopped, yet the feeling of it still echoed inside her chest. It had been years since she last felt something like that. Something that reminded her she was once more than just a cleaner in the music center. She lowered her eyes, trying to calm her emotions, but inside her, memories she had buried long ago began to rise like soft waves, one after another, as the teachers and students kept staring at her. Maria found herself drifting back into her past. She remembered a small room where she first learned how to sit properly at a piano. She remembered her old teacher, a woman with sharp eyes, but a soft heart, who told her, "You have a gift. Never stop playing." Maria was young then, full of dreams, full of passion, full of hope. Every day she practiced for hours, sometimes forgetting to eat, sometimes ignoring the world, because music made her feel alive. It was her escape, her joy, her world, but life changed quickly, and her dreams faded too soon. The memory shifted, and Maria could see her family struggling. Her father fell sick, her mother lost her job, and suddenly there was no money for music lessons, no money for competitions, and no time for dreams. Maria became the responsible one, the one who had to find work, the one who had to keep the family together. The piano, once her whole life, became a luxury she could no longer afford. She remembered the day she stopped practicing. She closed the piano lid gently and whispered goodbye, believing she would return someday. But that someday never came. The years passed quietly, and her fingers slowly forgot the keys. Or so she thought. A soft voice pulled her back into the present. One of the teachers stepped closer and asked, "Maria, where did you learn to play like that?" His voice was gentle now, completely different from earlier. Maria looked at him with calm eyes and simply said, "When I was young, she didn't add more. She didn't tell them about her competitions, her awards, her dreams. She didn't tell them how she once imagined performing on grand stages with shining lights. She kept her past inside her heart, where it had lived silently for so long." But the teachers wanted to know more. They exchanged looks, each one feeling a mix of guilt and curiosity. The strict older teacher, the one who rarely smiled, suddenly spoke. "Maria, that piece is extremely difficult. Even advanced students struggle with it," she said, her voice softer than usual. "How did you play it so perfectly?" Maria took a breath. Her eyes lowering again, she said in a quiet tone, "I practiced a lot when I was younger." Her words were simple, but her voice carried years of pain, sacrifice, and lost opportunities. The students stepped closer too, forming a small circle around her. Their earlier laughter had disappeared completely, replaced with respect and awe. One teenage girl whispered, "Miss Maria, did you used to perform?" Another boy asked, "Why did you stop playing?" Maria looked at their young, curious faces and felt a small ache in her chest. She saw in them the same excitement she once had, the same hunger to learn, the same hope she once carried like a bright flame. She didn't want to make them sad, but she also didn't want to lie. So she answered carefully, "Life became difficult. I had to focus on other things." The room fell silent again. But this time it wasn't because they doubted her. It was because they understood. Every person in that room suddenly saw her differently. She wasn't the quiet woman they ignored earlier. She wasn't the cleaner they assumed had no talent. She was a woman who had once carried a dream bigger than any of them imagined. A dream she had sacrificed for her family. The teachers felt their hearts grow heavy, realizing they had treated her unfairly. They had judged her without knowing her story, without knowing the weight she carried. Maria looked around the room and finally saw something different in their eyes. Something gentle, something respectful, something almost apologetic. She didn't know how to react. She had spent so many years hiding her emotions, living quietly, avoiding attention. But now her heart felt open, exposed, and strangely alive. She touched the piano keys again, letting her fingers rest there lightly, as if confirming that the instrument was real, that the moment was real, that her music had truly returned after all these years. A soft whisper slipped from her lips. "Not meant for anyone to hear. I miss this," she murmured. But the students closest to her heard it. One girl's eyes filled with tears. She said softly, "We're lucky you played today, Maria." Felt warmth spread through her chest at those words. She had forgotten what it felt like to be appreciated, to be seen, to be valued for something she loved. It felt like the world was giving her a small piece of her old dream back, and she didn't know whether to hold it or let it pass. The head teacher then stepped forward, clearing his throat gently. He wasn't looking at her the way he used to, not with dismissal or doubt, but with sincere respect. "Maria," he said slowly, Would you consider playing for the advanced class later today?" His voice carried no pressure. Only hope. Maria blinked, unsure if she heard him correctly. She had just played in front of them for the first time in years. And now they wanted more? She hesitated, her heart beating fast. But something inside her whispered that this might be the moment she had been waiting for. The moment that might change everything again. She looked at the piano, then at the students. Then at the teachers who had once judged her, and for the first time in a very long time, Maria allowed herself to feel brave again. She nodded gently, saying only one simple word. Yes, and with that single word, the door to her forgotten dream opened just a little wider, inviting her to step back into the world she once loved. Maria stood from the piano bench slowly, unsure of what would happen next. The students were still staring at her, as if she had turned into a completely different person. The teachers whispered among themselves, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. For years they had seen her as someone small and unimportant, someone who walked quietly through the halls carrying cleaning supplies. But now they saw her as something they never imagined, a woman with talent so powerful it left the entire room speechless. As Maria stepped away from the piano, she felt her legs tremble slightly. She wasn't used to so many eyes watching her. She wasn't used to being in the center of attention. For a moment she thought about leaving the room, returning to her quiet life, maybe pretending none of this ever happened. But deep inside her chest, something was glowing. A warmth she hadn't felt in many years. It was the memory of her old confidence. The part of her that once loved performing, the part that refused to die no matter how hard life became. One teacher finally found the courage to speak. "Maria, that was extraordinary," he said, his voice full of genuine respect. Maria looked down shyly, shaking her head a little. "I only played how I used to play," she replied softly. But her words didn't match what everyone had heard. They hadn't just listened to someone who used to play. They had listened to someone who still had a gift, someone who carried music in her bones, someone who was born to play. The older teacher, the one who never complimented anyone, stepped forward next. She looked at Maria with eyes full of regret and admiration. "We misjudged you," she admitted quietly. "We didn't know." "We truly didn't know." Maria nodded gently, but didn't say anything. She never liked making others feel guilty. She never wanted anyone to feel bad for her. She simply wanted a peaceful life. But after today, she felt something different growing inside her, the desire to step out of the shadows. Even just a little. A group of students walked up to her then, their expressions soft and amazed. One of them said, "Miss Maria, can you teach us how to play like that?" Another added. "Your hands move so beautifully." Maria felt her eyes sting with emotion. She had never been asked to teach anyone in her entire life. No one had ever looked at her as someone with knowledge worth sharing. The student's admiration touched her heart deeply. She smiled, a soft, warm smile that she rarely showed, and said, "I can try," but before anything else could happen, the head teacher lifted a hand to quiet the room. He looked at Maria with a serious but kind expression. "Maria," he began, "we want to understand your story." Maria froze for a moment. She didn't like talking about her past, especially not in front of so many people. But something in the teacher's tone assured her that he wasn't asking out of curiosity, he was asking out of respect. She inhaled slowly and nodded, agreeing to share a little. She told them how she learned to play as a child, how she loved practicing for hours, how she dreamed of becoming a professional pianist one day. She told them about her teacher who pushed her to work hard, who believed she could become great. The students listened with wide eyes, imagining her younger self playing on small stages. The teachers listened too, feeling the weight of every word. Then Maria explained how everything changed when her father fell sick, how her family needed money, how her dreams slipped from her hands because survival became more important than music. She didn't cry while speaking, but her voice trembled a little. Enough to make the room grow even quieter. The teachers exchanged sad looks, understanding now why her eyes seemed so tired over the years, why she moved gently, why she stayed quiet. She wasn't ordinary. She was a woman who carried the scars of sacrifice and still managed to keep kindness in her heart. When she finished speaking, no one said a word for a long moment. They were all processing the truth. The quiet woman they underestimated had lived a life stronger than any of them imagined. Finally, the strict older teacher stepped closer. She placed her hand lightly on Maria's shoulder and said, "You deserve more than what we gave you." Maria looked up slightly, confusion in her eyes. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. The teacher continued, "You deserve respect, and you deserve a chance to return to the music you love." Another teacher nodded and added, "We want you to play again, not just today, but whenever you can." Maria felt something rise inside her, a mix of fear, hope, and disbelief. She had never expected to hear those words. Not from teachers who once ignored her, not from people who never saw her talent before. She didn't know what to say, so she simply whispered, "Thank you." But the students weren't finished either. One girl suddenly clapped, and then another joined, and then the entire room erupted in applause. Louder and bigger than before. They weren't clapping for a cleaner. They weren't clapping for someone ordinary. They were clapping for a pianist, a woman with extraordinary skill, a woman who had surprised them beyond words. Maria felt her heart shake as the applause washed over her again. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide anymore. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, valued, and appreciated. She placed her hand on the piano once more and whispered to herself, "Maybe. Maybe this is my time to come back," and deep inside. She knew she wasn't just returning to music. Music was returning to her too, one note at a time. Maria stayed standing near the piano as the applause slowly faded. Her hands were shaking a little, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming warmth spreading inside her chest. She had not felt this kind of attention in years, maybe in her entire adult life. The students were still looking at her with admiration, and the teachers with deep respect for the first time. Maria felt the room treating her as someone who mattered, someone with talent, someone with a story worth listening to. She wasn't invisible anymore. And the feeling was both strange and beautiful. One teacher stepped forward. The head instructor, who had earlier doubted her. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before: humility. He said softly, "Maria, we are so sorry for how we treated you before." His voice trembled a little. Showing he meant every word, Maria felt her heart tighten. She never wanted anyone to feel guilty, yet hearing those words touched her in a way she couldn't explain. She shook her head gently and whispered, "It's okay." But the teacher continued, "No, it isn't. We should have seen you. We should have respected you from the beginning." Maria lowered her gaze. Not used to receiving such heavy praise or apologies, she clasped her hands together, trying to hold herself steady. The students behind her nodded respectfully. One boy said, "Miss Maria, you're amazing." A girl beside him added, "We want to learn from you." Their young voices filled the room with sincerity, and Maria felt something inside her soften. She had lived years believing no one would ever care about her music again. No one would see her talent. No one would understand her past, but now, a whole room of people was asking her to step into the light again. The strict older teacher took a step closer, her expression soft with regret. "Maria, did you really stop playing because of your family?" she asked gently. Maria nodded, her voice quiet as she replied, "We didn't have enough money. Music became a luxury. I had to work. I couldn't continue." The teacher's eyes filled with sadness as she whispered, "You sacrificed so much." Maria didn't respond right away. Her throat felt tight, and her chest felt heavy. She had spent so many years pretending her pain didn't matter, pretending her dreams were childish, pretending she was fine living quietly. But now, surrounded by people who finally understood her, she felt the weight of her sacrifices more clearly than ever. One student stepped closer and asked softly, "Do you miss it?" Maria's eyes lifted slowly. "Meeting the young girl's innocent face every single day," she replied. Her voice nearly breaking, the room fell into a deep silence. Her simple words carried years of longing, years of hidden suffering, years of dreams left behind. The students felt their hearts ache for her. The teachers felt ashamed for never noticing her sadness, and Maria felt exposed, vulnerable yet strangely relieved. She had never spoken her truth so openly before. The head teacher cleared his throat gently and said, "Maria, if you want, we can help you come back to music." Maria looked up sharply. "Surprised, help me," she repeated softly, unsure she understood. The teacher nodded. "Yes, you have real talent. Talent that shouldn't stay hidden anymore," another teacher added. "You can join our music team, help teach, help guide students." A younger teacher stepped forward too. "We can arrange practice times for you whenever you want." Their voices came one after another. Forming a circle of support around her, Maria felt overwhelmed. She wasn't used to people offering her opportunities. She wasn't used to being wanted, valued, or encouraged. She pressed a hand over her chest, trying to steady her breathing. "I don't know if I'm good enough to teach," she said quietly. But the strict teacher shook her head firmly. "Maria, you don't just play well, you play with soul. That's something even we can't teach." Maria felt her cheeks grow warm as she listened. She wasn't sure she deserved such praise, but hearing it made her heart feel lighter, like someone had lifted a heavy weight from her shoulders. The students then gathered closer around her, creating a small circle. One of them, a shy boy who usually never spoke, whispered, "When you played, it felt like magic." Maria's eyes softened, and she whispered back, "Music is magic. When it comes from the heart, The students smiled, understanding something they had never understood before. They were not just watching a woman who could play well. They were watching someone who understood music deeply. Someone who lived it, breathed it, and carried it in her soul. The head teacher suddenly straightened and said, "Maria, will you play something else for us?" Maria blinked. Surprised now, she asked softly. The teacher nodded. "Only if you're comfortable." Maria looked at the piano, at the students, at the teachers, and at the room that had once felt cold and distant, but now felt warm and welcoming. She felt her heart beating faster. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was excitement. A feeling she hadn't felt since she was a teenager, preparing for her old performances. She walked back to the piano slowly, the room completely silent as everyone waited. She sat down again, placed her fingers gently on the keys, and closed her eyes. But this time, she chose a different piece, not something difficult, not something advanced. She chose a soft, emotional melody she had played when she was young, a piece she had loved deeply. When she played the first note, the room filled with warmth. The music poured out of her like water from a spring. Pure and full of emotion, the students felt goosebumps rise on their arms. The teachers felt tears forming in their eyes. Maria felt her whole soul coming alive again. Note by note, memory by memory, dream by dream. She wasn't just playing music now, she was healing. She was returning to the person she had once been, the person she had lost, the person she thought was gone forever. And everyone in the room could feel her heart in every note. When she finished, the silence that followed was deep and emotional. Then the applause returned, louder, fuller, warmer than ever before. Maria bowed her head as tears finally slipped down her cheeks. She wasn't just appreciated, she was rediscovered. She was reborn. Maria wiped her tears gently as the applause faded once again. She felt lighter, almost as if a huge stone had been lifted from her heart. For years she believed her music was gone forever, hidden under responsibilities and forgotten dreams, but now, surrounded by students and teachers who admired her talent, she felt something powerful rising inside her, a feeling she thought she would never experience again. She felt alive. She felt seen. She felt like a pianist again, not just a woman in the background of the music center. The head teacher stepped forward quietly and said, "Maria, we want to speak with you about something important." His tone was gentle, respectful, very different from the tone he once used with her. Maria nodded slowly, feeling nervous. She wondered if she had done something wrong, or if the moment was too good to be true. But when the head teacher led her toward the office, the students followed behind like a small crowd. Refusing to let her out of their sight, their eyes were filled with admiration. And Maria felt touched by their kindness. Inside the office, the teachers gathered around her. Not in a circle of authority, but a circle of respect. The strict older teacher, who was usually cold and distant, sat down beside her and said gently, "Maria, your talent is rare. We want to give you a real opportunity." Maria blinked in confusion. "Opportunity?" she asked softly. The teacher nodded and continued, "Yes. We want you to join our music department, not as a cleaner, but as an assistant piano instructor." Maria froze, her breath catching in her throat. She looked at them one by one, trying to understand if she had heard correctly. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Me?" An instructor, another teacher, smiled warmly. "Yes, you. Who else?" he said. "You play better than most of our students, and with the right support, you can help shape their music journey." Maria covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed by the offer. She had spent so many years cleaning these floors, wiping windows, arranging chairs for classes she could never join, and now they wanted her to teach in the same rooms she once cleaned every morning. She felt a swirl of emotions: fear, joy, disbelief, hope, all blending together. "I don't know if I can do it," she whispered. The younger teacher shook his head immediately. "You can," he said firmly. "We've seen your hands, your control, your expression. You aren't just skilled. You are gifted," the strict older teacher added. "And most importantly, you play with heart. Our students need someone like you." Maria lowered her head, struggling to stop her tears. She wasn't crying out of sadness, but out of gratitude. She had forgotten what it felt like to be valued, to be offered something meaningful. To feel like her talent had a purpose. After a moment, she breathed slowly and said, "If I accept, what would I have to do?" The head teacher smiled. Proud of her courage, "We will train you," he explained. "You will assist in classes. You will guide students during practice, and eventually, you may have your own class." Maria felt her heart flutter like a bird discovering its wings again. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to try." The teachers exchanged relieved smiles. They had hoped she would say yes. And now they felt proud that they had recognized her talent before it was too late. The strict teacher touched Maria's hand lightly and said, "You deserve this chance. Don't ever doubt that." Maria felt warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't used to people believing in her, but she liked the feeling more than she expected when they stepped out of the office. The students were waiting eagerly. One girl rushed forward. "Did they offer you a job?" she asked excitingly. Maria smiled shyly. "Yes." As an assistant instructor, the room erupted in cheers. Some students clapped, others smiled widely, and a few even jumped with excitement. Maria felt embarrassed but happy, watching them celebrate her success like it was their own. One boy stepped closer and said, "Miss Maria, if you teach here, I want to be in your class," another girl added. "Me too." "Your music feels different," the shy boy from earlier whispered. "You play like you're telling a story." Maria's heart melted at their words. She realized that these children weren't just impressed by her talent, they were inspired by her. They saw a woman who never gave up completely. Even when life forced her to stop, they saw strength, softness, and courage in her hands. And they wanted to learn from that. Later that afternoon, the teachers arranged a small meeting to introduce Maria to the advanced class. The students from the earlier session insisted on coming along. The head teacher stood beside her and announced proudly, "Everyone, this is Maria. She will soon join us as part of the music team." The new class reacted with surprise, curiosity, and then excitement. A few clapped, some nodded, and many smiled. Maria bowed her head slightly in respect, still not used to being introduced as someone important. The piano sat in the center of the room. Waiting silently, the head teacher asked, "Maria, would you like to play something for them?" Maria hesitated for a moment, then slowly walked toward the piano. Her fingers touched the keys softly, as if greeting an old friend again. She chose a gentle piece, a melody that carried hope, growth, and quiet strength when she played the first note. The entire room fell silent once more. Her music flowed like a warm river. Calm, soothing, and full of emotion, the students listened with deep concentration, feeling every note inside their hearts. By the time she reached the last chord, even the new students were staring at her with admiration. They didn't see a cleaner, they didn't see someone ordinary. They saw a pianist, a teacher, a woman who carried a story of resilience and courage. Maria lifted her hands slowly. Looking around the room, the applause came again. Soft at first, then stronger, filling her heart with pride she had never allowed herself to feel before. And at that moment, Maria understood something important. She wasn't just returning to music. She was stepping into a new life, one where her talent would shine, one where her story would inspire, one where she no longer lived in the shadows of her past. She was ready to begin again, not as the woman who cleaned rooms, but as the woman who brought music back to life with every touch of the piano keys. Maria walked into the music center the next morning with a feeling she had not experienced in many years. The hallway looked the same, the rooms were the same, and the piano sat in its usual corner, but everything felt different to her now. The air felt lighter, the world felt brighter, and her heart felt full. Yesterday she had walked these halls as a cleaner. Today she walked them as a musician, as a teacher, as someone the entire building respected. She carried her small bag as always. But now it didn't hold cleaning supplies. It held music sheets, pencils, and a notebook filled with ideas for her new students. As she stepped into the main hall, the students began whispering excitedly. "She's here," one girl said. "Miss Maria is really joining us," another whispered. Their eyes sparkled with admiration. The teachers, who once barely noticed her, now greeted her with warm smiles and polite nods. The head teacher walked over and said, "Good morning." Maria, with real respect in his voice, she replied shyly, "Good morning. Still getting used to being treated like someone important?" The strict older teacher approached her next, carrying a folder. "These are the lesson plans for the advanced class," she explained gently. "But feel free to change anything you like. We trust your style." Maria blinked in surprise. No one had ever trusted her with something so meaningful before. She accepted the folder with trembling hands and whispered, "Thank you." The teacher patted her shoulder warmly and said, "You deserve this." Maria's first official class was about to begin. Her heart was beating fast, not from fear, but from excitement. She stood at the front of the room as the students settled into their seats. They watched her with anticipation. Ready to learn from someone who had moved their hearts with just a single melody, Maria looked at their eager faces. And for a moment she felt emotional. She remembered her own childhood. The first time she sat in a music class. The first time she touched a piano, the dream she once lost, and the dream she was now reclaiming. She took a deep breath and said softly, "Today, we will learn to feel the music, not just play it." The students nodded eagerly. Maria walked to the piano and sat down. Her fingers touched the keys gently, and she played a small, simple melody, soft like morning light. "Music is not just notes," she said. "It is emotion. It is memory. It is life." The students listened carefully, hanging on to every word. Her voice carried wisdom they could not find in textbooks. Wisdom born from years of pain, sacrifice, and rediscovered hope. One boy raised his hand and asked, "Miss Maria, how do you make the piano sound like it's speaking?" Maria smiled softly and replied, "Because I listen to it." The class laughed warmly. Admiring her simplicity, she guided their fingers on the keys, corrected their posture, and encouraged them gently. Her teaching style was soft but powerful, patient but inspiring. She didn't teach them to be perfect. She taught them to love the piano, to connect with it, to trust it, and slowly, the room began to fill with soft, hopeful music created by young hands, learning from a woman who had once lost her dream but found it again. As the days passed, Maria grew more confident. The music center began to change around her. Students requested extra classes just so they could learn from her. Parents sent messages thanking her for inspiring their children. The teachers often consulted her for advice, asking Maria, "How would you teach this part?" Or "What do you think this student needs?" She became an important part of the music center, not because she was perfect, but because she understood struggle, emotion, and the heart of music better than anyone. One afternoon, the head teacher called her into the office again. Maria felt nervous for a moment, but the teacher smiled warmly and handed her a small envelope. "This is for you," he said. Maria opened it slowly. Inside was an invitation to perform at the annual community recital, an event attended by families, musicians, and local artists. Her breath caught in her throat. "You want me to perform?" she whispered in disbelief. The teacher nodded proudly. "The audience deserves to hear someone like you." Maria felt tears rise again. But these tears were different. They were warm, full of joy and gratitude. She accepted the invitation with shaking hands. That evening, she walked home under the evening sky feeling lighter than she had in years. She held the envelope close to her heart, whispering softly, "Thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to life itself, for giving her a second chance, for letting her return to the world she loved, for letting her find her music again." When the night of the recital arrived, the auditorium was filled with people. Students sat in the front rows. Teachers guided the younger children, and the parents filled the rest of the seats. Maria stood backstage, dressed in a simple but elegant dress. The piano waited for her at the center of the stage. Shining under the soft lights, her heart raced. But not with fear. She felt ready, more ready than she'd ever felt in her life. When her name was announced, the entire audience clapped warmly. Maria stepped onto the stage and sat at the piano. The hall grew silent. She closed her eyes and let her fingers touch the keys. And then she began to play. The melody poured out of her like sunlight. Warm, soft, full of emotion, each note carried her story, her childhood dreams, her sacrifices, her years of silence, her rediscovery, her rebirth. The audience felt every emotion she poured into the music. Some cried softly, others closed their eyes and simply listened. The moment felt magical, powerful, unforgettable. When she played the final chord, the hall erupted in applause, louder and longer than anything she had ever experienced. Maria stood slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. She bowed deeply as the applause washed over her like a warm wave. She felt alive, whole, and truly happy for the first time. She understood that losing her dream had not destroyed her. It had shaped her, strengthened her, prepared her for this moment. Maria walked off the stage smiling. Knowing her journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. And she would spend the rest of her life sharing her music, teaching others, and proving that even the quietest person can carry the most extraordinary story inside their heart.